All right, so picture this. You're a Roman official, first century Britain. You're feeling pretty good, yeah.
Mm.
Confident, Rome, top of the world. But a rebellion's brewing, led by, wait for it, a warrior queen, someone who can do the unthinkable, bring those fractured British tribes together. And her goal, kick the Romans out. For good. That's the story we're diving into today, the legend, the truth, all that. Boudica. You might know her as, like, the symbol of British resistance, right? But how much of what we think we know is even accurate? To help us with this, sift through the centuries of myths and all that spin, we've got a real expert in Roman history. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Let's set the scene a little. So, Roman Britain. We're not just talking legions marching around, conquests, all that. There was this whole system, right? Client kingships,
Hmm.
local rulers working with the Romans, or so it seemed.
Yeah, the client kings.
Hmm.
Always more to the story there. These peaceful arrangements. Well, lot of resentment simmering under the surface. See, Roman influence wasn't just military boots on the ground. They brought their whole way of thinking about hierarchy, social structures, all that. Might have actually forced a more rigid system onto the Britons. I mean, who knows? Maybe they had a different way of doing things before.
So even the peaceful stuff had, like, downsides, huh? And of course, with power
Hmm.
comes the exploitation part.
Oh, absolutely. Roman taxes, land grabs, you name it, constant tension. I mean, to give you an idea of how volatile things were, there's this story, right, about a Roman soldier in Judea started a whole rebellion by, well, let's just say he had some unfortunate flatulence during Passover.
Hold on. A rebellion started by a fart. You're kidding.
Nope. It just shows you, though, right, how even something small, seemingly small, it can ignite a whole population when you've got, oppressed people, occupying forces. That brings us to Boudica, actually, what sparked her rebellion.
Okay, so two versions of this, right? One, less exciting, but probably more accurate. Roman economic exploitation. Crushing taxes, land seizures. Basically squeezing the Britons dry.
Right, that's the less glamorous side of things, for
Yeah.
sure.
Then there's the more dramatic story. Tacitus, the Roman historian, he loves this one. Boudica's husband, Prasutagus, he dies, leaves his kingdom to his daughters. But the Romans? Nope. They flog Boudica, take her land. Some accounts even say they assaulted her daughters.
Yeah, that's the version that gets passed down.
It's powerful, I'll give it that. Yeah. But Tacitus, writing decades later, maybe he's embellishing just a little. I mean, got to think about his perspective. Maybe demonizing the Romans, making Boudica look better.
It's possible, yeah. Ancient spin doctoring. But whether it's the boring economic truth or the tragic injustice story, one thing's clear. Boudica was pushed to her breaking point.
And she wasn't going down without a fight. She rallies her tribe, the Iceni, and gets others on board too, which, Romans were usually good at preventing, pitting British tribes against each other, the whole divide and conquer thing.
Right.
But Boudica, her charisma, that fury, powerful unifying forces.
It's really something. How she bridged those tribal divides shows you just how much resentment there was. I mean, the Britons, they weren't some big happy family. They had their own rivalries, conflicts, but Boudica, she gave them a common enemy.
So we've got our rebellious queen, population ready to boil over, and the Roman administration totally caught with their pants down. What happens next?
Well, first target, Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester. Now, this wasn't just any city. This was a symbol. Roman power, civilization, all that. Built right on confiscated British land, too.
And Boudica's forces, they don't mess around. Total destruction. A message loud and clear. You can practically feel the rage, the defiance.
It was a strike at the heart of Roman authority, basically saying, your civilization, built on our land, it's going to burn. This wasn't just a military thing. This was cultural.
And as Boudica's forces are moving across the countryside, right, they run into a real test. The Ninth Legion, one of Rome's best. What happens next? Shocks the Romans to their core.
It's true. The Britons, who Roman historians love to call undisciplined barbarians, they win decisively. The Ninth Legion routed. Think about that. This work of tribal warriors fighting for their freedom. They take down a symbol of Roman power.
That must send ripples all the way back to Rome. I bet even Emperor Nero was sweating a little.
And you can bet on it. Panic in Rome. Nero, not exactly known for keeping his cool, right? He considered just abandoning Britain. That's how big of a threat Boudica was.
Wow. So for a minute there, it looked like she might actually do it, drive the Romans out. But we know the story doesn't end there. So what happened? What brought her down?
Okay, so after those victories, Boudica's forces, they move on. Londinium, London, as we know it today, another key Roman settlement, and they sack it. I mean, the destruction, archaeologists can still see it.
So she was on a roll. taking down Roman strongholds left and right.
She was. But the Roman military machine, not so easy to defeat. The Roman governor, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, seasoned general, cunning, ruthless, all that. He knew facing Boudica head-on in open battle, too risky,
Ah,
with her numbers.
so he decides to play it smart, wait for the right moment, classic Roman tactics. But what was the plan?
He picked his battleground carefully, somewhere along Watling Street, probably exact location, historians still debate it. But the terrain, that was key. He needed somewhere Roman discipline, their formations, would give them an edge. The Britons, more fluid, less organized, would be disadvantaged.
So he lured them into a trap, using the land itself.
Exactly. Roman military strategy versus, well, maybe a bit of overconfidence from the Britons after their wins.
And it worked.
Oh, yeah. Battle of Watling Street, devastating defeat for Boudica, Roman legions, better equipment, discipline. They just cut through the British ranks, heavy casualties.
So Roman strategy, maybe a little overconfidence on the Britain side, maybe even some Roman psychological warfare.
Could be. I mean, the Romans, they were masters of propaganda, spread rumors, sowed discord among their enemies, weakened their resolve. Wouldn't be surprised if they tried that with Boudica's forces, too.
It's a good reminder, isn't it? Battles aren't just won on the battlefield. They're won in the minds of the people fighting. But what about Boudica herself? After this defeat, what happened?
Well, like a lot of her story, shrouded in mystery, Tacitus, our dramatic Roman friend, he says she took poison, refused to surrender, paints it as a noble, defiant act, you know?
Very Tacitus, yeah. Any other accounts?
There are. Dio, another Roman historian, he just says she died of illness. Without more evidence, who knows which is closer to the truth? And to add to the mystery, we don't even know where she's buried.
I thought the Romans were big on those elaborate burials. You'd think if they'd captured her, there'd be some record of it.
You would, yeah. But the Iceni, they did things differently. No cremation, no big tombs. They practiced excarnation, basically leaving the body exposed to the elements.
So unlike the Romans, who wanted to leave their mark everywhere, the Iceni had a different relationship with the land, huh? It's almost poetic. Boudica's body returning to the very land she fought for.
Adds another layer to the story, doesn't it? And even though her physical remains are lost, her legacy, oh, that's echoed through the centuries. She went from someone the Romans probably wanted to erase to a powerful symbol of resistance.
Speaking of legacy, it's wild how her image has changed over time. British nationalists, feminist movements, everyone's claimed her.
It's amazing, right? The power of her story. She's become this blank canvas. People project their own values, aspirations onto her.
Like Victorian era, she was all about British strength, defiance. Later on, women's liberation, she's an icon of female empowerment. It makes you wonder, if she could see all this, would she even recognize herself in these portrayals?
It's a good question, but I think the biggest takeaway from Boudica's story is this. History is rarely simple. It's messy, complicated, and we're always reinterpreting it through the lens of, our present.
So where do we land on Boudica? Hero, villain, somewhere in between.
I think those labels are too neat, too black and white. She was a product of her time, caught in a clash of cultures, a power struggle, ultimately a fight for survival. Hero, villain, whatever. Her story reminds us that history's full of these complicated people who don't fit in neat boxes.
Well said. It's a good reminder that the past is never really past, is it? It shapes who we are, how we see the world. And Boudica, with all her complexities, her contradictions, she makes us think critically about history, power, the stories we choose to believe. So, warrior queen, Roman PR nightmare, a bit of both. We've only scratched the surface here. There's so much more to uncover. We'll put some links in the show notes for anyone who wants to keep digging. And as always, if you find any cool stuff about Boudica, share it. We're all on this historical deep dive together. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those brains buzzing. So Boudica's army, right? Fueled by, this clash of cultures wanting their land back.
Yeah.
They rampaged through Colchester.
Yeah.
And they didn't just burn stuff down, did they? They went after symbols of Roman power, right? Really making a statement.
Oh, absolutely. It was a way of saying, your civilization built on our land, yeah, that's going to burn.
Yeah.
This wasn't just military, it was a cultural uprising.
And as Boudica's forces are, sweeping across the land, they come face to face with a real challenge, the Ninth Legion, one of Rome's top fighting units. And what happens next? Well, it's a shocker for the Romans.
Yeah, the Britons, who, let's face it, Roman historians kind of dismissed as undisciplined barbarians, they win. And not just win, they rout the Ninth Legion. It's a huge victory.
Wow. Think about that. This group of, ragtag warriors, right?
Right.
Fighting for their homes. They take down this symbol of Roman might. I bet that sent shockwaves all the way back to Rome.
You better believe it. Panic in Rome, I'd say.
I bet even Emperor Nero was a little nervous.
Oh, Nero. Yeah, he was freaking out. He even, considered abandoning Britain altogether. That's how big of a threat Boudica was.
So for a while there, it really seemed like she might actually do it, drive the Romans out. But obviously, we know that didn't happen, so what went wrong? How did she lose?
Well, after those big wins, Boudica's forces, they move on. Their target, Londinium. London, as we know it today. Another major Roman settlement. And just like Colchester, they sack it. The destruction was massive. I mean, you can still see evidence of it today.
So she was on a roll,
Yeah.
taking down Roman strongholds one after another.
Yeah, she was. But the thing is, the Romans, they were tough. Their military was a machine. You don't just beat them a couple times and they give up.
Makes sense. So what did the Romans do? How did they turn things around?
The Roman governor at the time, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, he was a smart guy, a good general,
Yeah.
and ruthless. He knew that facing Boudica head on with the numbers she had, that was suicide.
So he's got to come up with a plan.
Yeah.
Something a little more strategic.
Exactly. He needed to use his advantages.
Classic Roman thinking, right?
Yeah.
Use your strengths, exploit your enemy's weaknesses.
Exactly. So what he does is he chooses his battleground carefully. We think it was somewhere along Watling Street, but the exact spot, no one knows for sure. But the terrain, that's what mattered. He needed a place where the Roman legions, with their discipline, their formations, they'd have the edge. The Britons, they were more about mobility, less organized. That kind of terrain would be bad for them.
So he basically lured them into a trap, using the land itself against them.
Yeah, pretty much. Roman strategy versus, well, maybe a little bit of overconfidence on the Britain side. They'd been winning after all.
And it worked.
Big time. The Battle of Watling Street, it was a massacre. Roman legions just tore through the Britons.
So Roman strategy was a big factor, maybe some overconfidence from Boudica's side. Any chance the Romans used, I don't know, some psychological warfare too?
Oh, for sure. I mean, the Romans, they were masters of propaganda, spreading rumors, sowing discord amongst their enemies, all to break their morale. They probably tried that with Boudica's forces too.
Right, because battles aren't just won on the battlefield, are they? It's about the minds of the soldiers too. But what about Boudica after this crushing defeat? What happened to her? So Boudica loses at Watling Street. Badly. What happens to her was the end of the story.
Well, like a lot of things with Boudica, it's a bit of a mystery, you know? Tacitus, our good friend, the Roman historian, he claims she took poison. Didn't want to surrender to Rome. Makes for a good story, right?
Yeah.
Noble, defiant, all that.
Yeah, sounds very Tacitus. But is that the only story? Anyone else say something different?
There is another version, yeah. Dio, another Roman historian, he just says she got sick and died. So, without more evidence, hard to say which one is true or if either of them are. And to add to the whole mystery, we don't even know where she's buried.
Huh, that's weird. I thought the Romans were all about big fancy burials, weren't they? You'd think if they captured her, there'd be some record of it, a tomb or something.
Yeah, you'd think so. But the Iceni, they didn't do things the Roman way. They didn't believe in cremation or those big tombs. They did something called excarnation. Basically, they left the body out in the open, exposed to the elements.
So it was about returning to nature, becoming part of the land again. Very different from the Romans. I mean, it's kind of poetic, isn't it? Boudica's body going back to the very land she fought to protect.
It does add another layer to her story, yeah. And even though her actual remains are lost to time, her legacy, oh, that's lived on, big time. She went from someone the Romans probably wanted to erase from history completely to this powerful symbol of resistance.
And speaking of her legacy, it's amazing how her image has been used and reinterpreted over time. I mean, everyone from British nationalists to feminist movements have claimed her as one of their own.
It's incredible, isn't it? It just shows you how powerful her story is. She's become this blank canvas, and people project their own values and ideas onto her.
Yeah, like you said, the Victorians saw her as a symbol of British strength, standing up to invaders. And then later, during the women's liberation movement, she becomes this icon of female power and defiance. It makes you wonder, if Boudica could see how she's been portrayed throughout history, would she even recognize herself?
It's an interesting thought, right? I mean, who knows? But I think the most important thing to remember about Boudica's story is that history is rarely simple. It's messy, it's complicated, and we're always looking at it through the lens of our own time and our own experiences.
So after all this, where do we land on Boudica? Is she a hero, a villain? or somewhere in between?
I don't think those labels really do her justice. She was a woman of her time, a product of her culture, caught in the middle of this huge clash of civilizations. She was fighting for her people, for her land, for her way of life. Whether you see her as a hero or a villain or something else entirely, her story reminds us that history is full of complex figures, people who defy easy categorization.
That's a great point. It's a good reminder that the past isn't just something that happened a long time ago. It shapes who we are today, how we see the world, and the stories we tell ourselves about our place in it. And Boudica, with all her complexities and contradictions, she challenges us to think critically about history, about power, about the stories we choose to believe. So, was she a warrior queen?
Hmm.
A Roman PR nightmare? Or a bit of both? I guess that's up to each of us to decide. We've only scratched the surface here. There's so much more to explore. We'll be sure to put some links in the show notes for anyone who wants to keep digging. And as always, if you find anything interesting about Boudica, we'd love to hear about it. We're all on this historical deep dive together. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those brains buzzing.